Okay, we're to Chapter 11I, The War on Terror equals Police State USSA. And this seems like another one of those things that a person can try to show or at least talk about to someone that doesn't seem to really have a clue and they don't really want to know, but you know how it is when you're wanting to, something comes up and you want to try to illustrate some of what's really going on here, especially with the police state. And you can try to tell them, hey, this is the same thing as Hitler set up and blah, blah, blah. And I just get no reaction. It's just like, I mean, most of the time. And it's like, yeah, right. I mean, they don't even say that. They don't say anything. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people really understand what I'm talking about. But this is just one of those things that there's a block there for it to really sink in. And so let's start reading. Quote, "An evil exists that threatens every man, woman, and child of this great nation. We must take steps to ensure our domestic security and protect our homeland." Unquote. Adolf Hitler when announcing the Gestapo to the citizens of Germany. If you'll remember from earlier in this book, Adolf Hitler staged a false flag attack and blamed it on communist terrorists. Shortly after, he passed the Enabling Act, which completely eradicated the German Constitution and destroyed people's liberties. Hitler then led a series of preemptive wars that were justified to the German people as necessary to maintain homeland security. Quote, "Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country." Unquote. Nazi Kingpin Hermann Goering, founder of the Gestapo, commander of the Luftwaffe, and Hitler's right-hand man. We know one of the intentions of the 9/11 false flag attack, to invade the Middle East. Now we need to go over the other reason, to wage war against the patriotic citizens of the United States of America, the ones like me who not only are questioning their motives but speaking up about it, resisting what they are trying to put over on our country by educating others to the truth of what is really happening, exactly what is contained in this book. Many people do not know that the Patriot Act was already written and ready to go long before September 11th, but at the same time, according to the Bush administration, they knew nothing about terrorist attacks that were pending against us. After all, that is why 9/11 happened, right? We, according to them, we were caught off guard, and the only way to protect us is through legislation contained in the Patriot Act. The USA Patriot Act is an acronym that stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. It was passed on October 26, 2001, in the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks, granting sweeping new powers to law enforcement and intelligence gathering agencies, and establishing the Gestapo of the 21st century, the Department of Homeland Security, which is the enforcement arm of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act offers a broad definition of terrorism, which subjects non-terrorist political groups to government surveillance, wiretapping, harassment, and criminal action. In other words, anyone who questions the actions of the Illuminati-controlled federal government is targeted as a terrorist. This is the primary reason for 9/11 and the subsequent immediate ramming through of the Patriot Act and Homeland Security. to monitor and attack the rising patriot movement in the United States, people who are waking up to the slide into the one world government. By waking up other patriotic Americans as to what the hell is really going on with our country and the world, these radicals, by definition of the Patriot Act, become enemies of the federal government they want to take back control of from the proponents of the New World Order. The Patriot Act increases the ability of state and federal law enforcement agencies to search and monitor telephone, email communications, medical, financial, and other records, eases restrictions on foreign intelligence gathering within the United States, expands the Secretary of the Treasury's authority to regulate financial transactions, and broadens the discretion of law enforcement and immigration authorities in detaining and deporting immigrants suspected of terrorism-related acts. The Act also explicitly expands the definition of terrorism to include domestic terrorism, thus enlarging the number of activities to which the Patriot Act's expanded law enforcement powers can be applied. The Act was passed by wide margins in both houses of Congress and was supported by members of both the Republican and Democratic parties. Remember, this thing got rammed through right in the midst of the anthrax attacks, so no one in Congress was going to do so much as utter a peep in resistance and look like they were sympathetic to terrorism. Opponents of the law have criticized its activities through which law enforcement officers can search a home or business without the owner's or the occupant's permission or knowledge, the expanded use of national security letters, which allows the FBI to search telephone, email, and financial records without a court order, and the expanded access of law enforcement agencies to business records, including library and financial records. Many of the Act's provisions were to expire beginning December 31, 2005, approximately 4 years after its passage. In the months preceding the expiration date, supporters of the Act pushed to make its provisions permanent, while critics sought to revise various sections to enhance civil liberty protections. In July of 2005, the U.S. Senate passed a reauthorization bill with substantial changes to several sections of the Act, while the House reauthorization bill kept most of the Act's original language. The two bills were then reconciled in a conference committee that was criticized by senators from both the Republican and Democratic parties for ignoring civil liberty concerns. The bill, which removed most of the changes from the Senate version, passed Congress on March 2, 2006, and was signed into law by Skull and Bonesman President George W. Bush on March 10, 2006. Under the Patriot Act, civil liberties, especially privacy rights, have taken a severe blow, as witnessed by the following actions allowed under the Act. Dramatically expanded ability of states and the federal government to conduct surveillance of American citizens. Any crime can now put you under the microscope of Homeland Security. Foreign and domestic intelligence agencies can more easily spy on Americans. Eliminated government accountability. Authorized the use of sneak and peek search warrants in connection with any federal crime, including misdemeanors, and on and on. And if that wasn't intrusive and draconian enough, the Patriot Act has been revised in the last few years into an even more intrusive and Constitution-annulling piece of legislation, with all changes signed off by the puppet President Obama. Now, who exactly is a potential domestic terrorist under the Patriot Act? Although I'm not listing everything that classifies you as a potential terrorist, you may very well find yourself on the list below and suspected of terrorist activity by the feds. If you are a libertarian, if you have political statements or political bumper stickers on your car, if you are pro-Second Amendment and or own a gun or guns, if you buy or possess survivalist literature, whether fiction or nonfiction, if you are a prepper, as in you buy food in bulk, stockpile food, guns, ammunition, hand tools, medical supplies, etc., in case of emergency, if you have fear of economic collapse, if you own gold and or silver coins and bullion, if you have religious views concerning the book of Revelation. In other words, if you are a Christian, you are considered a potential terrorist under the USSA police state. If you have expressed fears of Big Brother or Big Government. If you homeschool your kids. If you believe in conspiracy theories that involve grave threat to national sovereignty and or personal liberty, like exactly what is contained in this book. If you are an American who believes your way of life is under attack or threatened. If you are fiercely nationalistic, as opposed to universal and international in orientation, like being opposed to the United Nations agenda of eliminating all sovereign countries' borders and weapons. If you are a former police officer, veteran, or returning active duty soldier. If you supported Ron Paul for president. If you fly a U.S. flag at your house or have U.S. flags in or on your vehicle or place of employment. If you are pro-life. If you pay cash for anything rather than be electronically monitored by the banking cabal government of your purchases. If you value privacy on the web when using the internet in public places. If you use a device to record video. If you talk to police officers. If you wear a hooded sweatshirt or a hoodie. If you drive a van. If you write on a piece of paper in public. If you use your cell phone to record anything. And on and on and on and on and on. Virtually every American in the country violates at least one item off the list alone every single day. I personally am guilty of most of the above actions, and I'm about the most patriotic guy you'd ever meet in your life. Not a danger to the United States, but an extreme danger to the completion of the Great Plan. Are you getting it yet? The people the police state was intended to target from the get-go are the exact people who not only know about the New World Order and are trying to wake other people up about it, but those who are preparing to deal with what is coming our way in this country, a complete and utter economic collapse that will turn into a tyrannical police state. They don't want you to be prepared when this collapse happens. What the Federal Reserve is doing right now, printing billions of dollars every month and injecting it into the financial system, will factually crash our nation's economy. There is no way around it, and we are past the point of no return. At this point, they are just trying to buy time to stave off the inevitable, to get as tight of a grip as possible on the country via this police state they are assembling right this second. They want you to be 100% reliant on the government to save you, to be your savior, when this economic event occurs, and it will. You saw how well the feds took care of those people in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina. This time it will be a nationwide meltdown, and there will be little to no help for you and your family at all. This is the exact reason that people in the know about the New World Order agenda are prepping for this exact scenario. You can't depend on the feds, nor trust them at this point. Our federal government has been completely co-opted by the Luciferians running the Great Plan, New World Order, One World Government agenda. Everything I've told you in this book was as factually correct as possible, and this is what they are afraid of. Humanity learning the facts of what they are trying to do and standing up to them. So, we have the Patriot Act, which is enforced by the now $60 billion a year behemoth Homeland Security, with most of that money going towards the USSA police state here at home to target the most patriotic of Americans, the people opposed to the New World Order. I don't know if you've flown recently, but if you've gone through a cancer-causing full body scan or been groped by a TSA lackey, you are now feeling the initial effects of the progressing police state, and this is just the beginning. Here is a quick rundown of some of the facts of the Homeland Security police state compiled, surprisingly, by the Washington Post, dated July 19, 2012. The USSA police state is comprised of some 1,271 government organizations, and 1,931 private companies work on programs related to homeland security, counterterrorism, and intelligence in about 10,000 locations across the United States. Over 200,000 people alone work just for homeland security. In Washington and the surrounding area, 33 building complexes for top secret intelligence work are under construction or have been built since September 2001. Together they occupy the equivalent of almost 3 Pentagons or 22 U.S. Capitol buildings, about 17 million square feet of space. With the sudden availability of billions of dollars as a result of the Patriot Act, military and intelligence agencies multiplied. 24 organizations were created by the end of 2001, including the Office of Homeland Security and the Foreign Terrorist Asset Tracking Task Force. In 2002, 37 more were created to track weapons of mass destruction, collect threat tips, and coordinate the new focus on counterterrorism. That was followed the next year by 36 new organizations, and 26 after that, and 31 more, and 32 more, and 20 or more each in 2007, 8, and 9. In all, at least 263 organizations have been created or reorganized as a response to 9/11. Each has required more people, and those people have required more administrative and logistic support: phone operators, secretaries, librarians, architects, carpenters, construction workers, air conditioning mechanics, and, because of where they work, even janitors with top secret clearances. Add to all of the above even more aggressive police state legislation, the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, created by President Obama via executive order on December 31, 2011. Executive order means that the President bypassed Congress, which is purely against the Constitution. It was signed by the President at 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, while virtually nobody was paying attention to much other than the approaching New Year. This executive order was written and signed in complete secret, and then released by the White House on its website without comment. All this was done under a president who allegedly studied constitutional law while at Harvard. What a joke. I bet you've never even heard of the NDAA, let alone what kind of new powers it gives the feds. The NDAA basically carves up the United States into individual pieces, each to be under the authority of one of the president's cabinet members, with the president having the ultimate authority over all. Here is how it breaks down. The Secretary of Defense has power over all water resources in the United States. The Secretary of Commerce has power over all material services and facilities, including construction materials in the United States. The Secretary of Transportation has power over all forms of civilian transportation in the United States. The Secretary of Agriculture has power over all food resources and facilities, livestock plant health resources, and the domestic distribution of farm equipment in the United States. The Secretary of Health and Human Services has power over all health resources in the United States. The Secretary of Energy has power over all forms of energy in the United States. Not only this, but the NDAA gives the President the power to not only detain any American citizen without just cause, but to execute them if he wishes. This is how Obama is getting away with assassinating American citizens allegedly working for the Taliban in Afghanistan using those unmanned drones you probably haven't heard about. The ones that kill about 20 innocent civilians for every single bad guy they take out. We are essentially under martial law right this second. The Illuminati are creating a police state in America right under your nose. But how are they going to round up all those troublemaking patriots I was talking about? And what are they going to do with them to keep them from making more trouble? That's where FEMA comes in. A manufactured crisis is all the federal government needs to enact FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In 1979, by Trilateral Commission member President Jimmy Carter's executive order, FEMA was given tyrannical powers. It has the power, in case of national emergency, to suspend laws, move entire populations, arrest and detain citizens without a warrant, and hold them without trial. It can seize property, food supplies, and transportation systems, and can suspend the Constitution indefinitely. Not only is it the most powerful entity in the United States, but it was not even created under constitutional law by the Congress. It was a product of another presidential executive order. An executive order becomes law simply by a signature of the United States President. It does not even have to be approved by the representatives or senators in the Congress. A state of national emergency could be a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, or a currency crash, for example. The currency crash of our dollar is probably going to be the excuse to declare martial law in America. Mark my words, and it is coming within just a few years, and possibly just a few months. Here are just a few executive orders associated with FEMA that would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These executive orders have been on record for over 30 years and could be enacted by the stroke of a presidential pen. Executive Order Number 12148 created the Federal Emergency Management Agency that is to interface with the Department of Defense for civil defense planning and funding. An emergency czar was appointed. FEMA has only spent about 6% of its budget on national emergencies. The bulk of their funding has been used for the construction of secret underground facilities to assure continuity of government in case of a major emergency, foreign or domestic. Executive Order Number 12656 appointed the National Security Council as the principal body that should consider emergency powers. This allows the government to increase domestic intelligence and surveillance of United States citizens and would restrict the freedom of movement within the United States and grant the government the right to isolate large groups of civilians. The National Guard could be federalized to seal all borders and take control of U.S. airspace and all ports of entry. Here are just a few executive orders associated with FEMA that would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These executive orders have been on record for nearly 30 years and could be enacted by the stroke of a presidential pen. Executive Order 10990 allows the government to take over all modes of transportation and control of highways and seaports. Executive Order 10995 allows the government to seize and control the communication media. Executive Order 10997 allows the government to take over all electrical power, gas, petroleum, fuels, and minerals. Executive Order 10998 allows the government to take over all food resources and farms. Executive Order 11000 allows the government to mobilize civilians into work brigades under government supervision. Executive Order 11001 allows the government to take over all health, education, and welfare functions. Executive Order 11002 designates the Postmaster General to operate a national registration of all persons. Executive Order 11003 allows the government to take over all airports and aircraft, including commercial aircraft. Executive Order 11004 allows the Housing and Finance Authority to relocate communities, build new housing with public funds, designate areas to be abandoned, and establish new locations for populations. Executive Order 11005 allows the government to take over railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities. Executive Order 11051 specifies the responsibility of the Office of Emergency Planning and gives authorization to put all executive orders into effect in times of increased international tensions and economic or financial crisis. Executive Order 11310 grants authority to the Department of Justice to enforce the plans set out in executive orders, to institute industrial support, to establish judicial and legislative liaison, to control all aliens, to operate penal and correctional institutions, and to advise and assist the President. Executive Order 11049 assigns emergency preparedness function to federal departments and agencies, consolidating 21 operative executive orders issued over a 15-year period. Executive Order 11921 allows the Federal Emergency Preparedness Agency to develop plans to establish control over the mechanisms of production and distribution of energy sources, wages, salaries, credit, and the flow of money in United States financial institution in any undefined national emergency. It also provides that when a state of emergency is declared by the President, Congress cannot review the action for 6 months. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has broad powers in every aspect of the nation. On January 22, 2009, a new bill introduced in Congress authorized the Department of Homeland Security to set up a network of FEMA camp facilities to be used to house United States citizens in the event of a national emergency. The National Emergency Centers Act, or H.R. 645, mandated the establishment of national emergency centers to be located on military installations for the purpose of providing temporary housing, medical, and humanitarian assistance to individuals and families dislocated due to an emergency or major disaster, according to the bill. The legislation also states that the camps will be used to provide centralized locations to improve the coordination of preparedness, response, and recovery efforts of government, private, and not-for-profit entities and faith-based organizations. Ominously, the bill also states that the camps can be used to, quote, meet other appropriate needs as determined by the Secretary of Homeland Security, unquote. An open-ended mandate, which many besides myself fear could mean the forced detention of patriotic American citizens, in particular in the event of widespread rioting after a national emergency via total economic collapse. As the world economy continues its downward spiral, many credible forecasters have predicted riots and rebellions in America that will dwarf those already witnessed in countries like Iceland, Spain, Greece, and others. With active duty military personnel already being stationed inside the United States under NORTHCOM, partly for purposes of crowd control, fears that Americans could be incarcerated in detainment camps are very real. The camps will double up as command and control centers that will also house a 24/7 operations watch center, as well as training facilities for federal, state, and local first responders. The bill also contains language that will authorize camps to be established within closed or already operating military bases around the country. The language of the preamble to the agreement veils the program with talk of temporary migrant illegal alien holding centers, but it is made clear that the camps would also be used as, quote, the development of a plan to react to a national emergency, unquote. As far back as 2002, FEMA sought bids from major real estate and engineering firms to construct giant internment facilities in the case of a chemical, biological, or nuclear attack or a natural disaster. For those that think concentration camps will never come to America, they need to be educated to the fact that we've already had them. During World War II, thousands of patriotic Japanese Americans were uprooted from their homes and stuck in these camps for the duration of the war with Japan because they couldn't be trusted and were potential enemies of the state. I went to school with some of the children of these people, and they literally lost all their possessions, unable to make house payments, tax payments, etc. The banks took it all. The Illuminati are factually waging war against those who would resist their evil plans. Consider yourself warned. Alright, well that's the end of that subchapter, and just wanted to mention a couple things here. I've probably mentioned several times that some of the language used in this book is intentionally designed to be this book is designed to be read by somebody that really doesn't have a clue about hardly any of this stuff, and so it might seem like some of it is very juvenile or whatever, as far as and that's probably not the right word, but I mean, it's, if you've already been awake for several years or maybe all your life, then it's like, how dare you say I probably have never heard of the NDAA or whatever. But so I just want to make that point. Another one I may have mentioned before, I can't remember as far as this book goes, but and I wasn't awake during 9/11. I mean, I was a little bit maybe, due to a few things like Ruby Ridge and Waco. I mean, I knew something was really out of whack, and whatnot. It's just, there was no doubt about that. But as far as 9/11 was concerned, I mean, I wasn't awake. I mean, I was just like everybody, almost everybody else, just glued to the television. I was very much against invading Iraq, but that's beside the point. I mean, I still wasn't awakening, but I distinctly remember President Bush using the term fatherland when he was talking about the United States back when they were, right after 9/11. This Patriot Act stuff was coming up, Homeland Security trying to be rammed through. And I heard Bush use that term, and then he was told that he was going a little over the top by somebody. I mean, in Congress, I forget who it was, and I've looked for that several times to try to find some evidence of that. I mean, I know it wasn't my imagination, but I really do think that they scrubbed that. If there's anybody else out there that might remember him using that term, I mean, that would be great if you'd mention it in the comments or whatever. And if you got a link, that would just be awesome to him actually saying it. But anyway, that's enough about that. And now the next subchapter is the 9/11 Truth Movement. And I'll say right here, I don't know exactly where that chapter's going. I haven't kind of read it for quite some time. But the 9/11 Truth Movement is, there's a lot of good summaries there. I do know that in this next chapter, but the movement itself has been just like the Tea Party, just like everything basically, has been COINTELPRO'd. It has been infiltrated with, maybe from day one, but Alex Jones and the whole deal. But anyway, that's enough of my speculations and opinions here. So we'll pick up there when we talk to you next time.
Nazi Germany's war on terrorism. Hitler used the 1933 burning of the Reichstag, Parliament building by the arranged Dutchmen, to declare a war on terrorism, establish his legitimacy as a leader, even though he hadn't won a majority in the previous election. "You are now witnessing the beginning of a great epoch in history," he proclaimed, standing in front of the burned-out building, surrounded by national media. "This fire," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "is the beginning." He used the occasion as a sign from God. He called it to declare an all-out war on terrorism and its ideological sponsors, a people, he said, who traced their origins to the Middle East and found motivation for their evil deeds in their religion. 2 weeks later, the first prison for terrorists was built in Oranienburg, holding the first suspected allies of the infamous terrorist. In a national outburst of patriotism, The nation's flag was everywhere, even printed in newspapers suitable for display. Within 4 weeks of the terrorist attack, the nation's now popular leader had pushed through legislation, in the name of combating terrorism, and fighting the philosophy he said spawned it, that suspended constitutional guarantees of free speech, privacy, and habeas corpus. Police could now intercept mail and wiretap phones. Suspected terrorists could be imprisoned without specific charges, and without access to their lawyers. Police could sneak into people's homes without warrants, if the cases involved terrorism. To get his patriotic decree on the protection of people and state passed over the objections of concerned legislators and civil libertarians, he agreed to put a 4-year sunset provision on it. If the national emergency provoked by the terrorist attack on the Reichstag building was over by then, the freedoms and rights would be returned to the people, and the police agencies would be re-restrained. Within the first months after that terrorist attack, at the suggestion of a political advisor, he brought a formerly obscure word into common usage. Instead of referring to the nation by its name, he began to refer to it as the fatherland. As hoped, people's hearts swelled with pride, and the beginning of an us versus them mentality was sown. Our land was the homeland, citizens thought, all others were simply foreign lands. Within a year of the terrorist attack, Hitler's advisors determined that the various local police and federal agencies around the nation were lacking the clear communication and overall coordinated administration necessary to deal with the terrorist threat facing the nation, including those citizens who were of Middle Eastern ancestry, and thus probably terrorist sympathizers. He proposed a single new national agency to protect the security of the fatherland, consolidating the actions of dozens of previously independent police, border, and investigative agencies under a single powerful leader. Most Americans remember his Office of Fatherland Security, known as the Reichssicherheitsbeauftragtenstaffel, simply by its most famous agency's initials, the SS. And, perhaps most important, he invited his supporters and industry into the halls of government to help build his new detention camps, his new military, and his new empire which was to herald 1,000 years of peace. Industry and government worked hand in glove, in a new type of pseudo-democracy first proposed by Mussolini, and sustained by war.